if one of the ex-wives wanted to return.
Return to the family?
This isn't good.
Like, what?
This is not good signs, Robyn. What?
I'd be very surprised. I don't want to even answer this because I'm just like...
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, well, your facial expression said it all. You said no. Your facial expression said everything.
Making me sad
Yeah.
right now.
I'm sorry.
No, because you like just opened this little portal of hope, and I'm just like, I didn't even think of that, and now I'm just like,
Really? Because your facial expression said it was a portal of depression.
I gotta move away from that, because I'll fall apart, and I can't be on this set.
Stop everything. What Mykelti just revealed about Robyn changes everything we thought we knew, and it only gets worse from here. Hey besties, pause for a second, because what we're about to unpack might completely change how you see this entire situation. If you just watched that clip I showed you of Mykelti Brown reacting to Robyn Brown's comments on this week's Sister Wives, then you already felt it too. That moment wasn't scripted. It wasn't polished. It was raw, uncomfortable, and honestly telling. And stay till the end, because this only gets more revealing. So let's talk about it. Robyn was asked a pretty straightforward question. Would she want the other wives to ever come back? And from the jump, her answer was a hard no. Not hesitant. Not conflicted. Just no. Do you want them back? No. How would you feel if they returned? No. I don't want that. No. Then, only after realizing how harsh that sounded, she tried to soften it, pivoting into that familiar line about hope being dangerous. But the damage was already done. And Mykelti's reaction to that moment? That reaction said everything viewers at home were thinking. It was shock mixed with clarity. And the more I watch Mykelti and Tony talk, the clearer something becomes. Yes, they have problems with Cody, but a huge part of their frustration doesn't start or end with him. A lot of it points directly at Robyn. In their Patreon response to this episode, Mykelti and Tony addressed the idea of whether Cody's so-called apology tour could ever lead to real reunions. And the answer was crystal clear. If Robyn is not involved, maybe. If Robyn is there, absolutely not. No hesitation. No gray area. As long as Robyn is part of the equation, the answer is no. What that tells me is this. Some of the kids are open, at least in theory, to conversations with their dad. But being pushed into a relationship with Robyn, that's a hard boundary. Completely off the table. And before we go further, I want you to really see the moment that sparked this reaction. Because Mykelti's face alone tells a whole story. Let's take a look. What the hell? Oh, that was interesting. Sometimes hope is dangerous. Now ask yourself this, what did her expression actually say? Because to me, it didn't say hope. It said, no. I'm not interested. Don't come back. That's the message written all over her face. Compare that to how someone looks when they're genuinely hurt but open. You'd see conflict. You'd see emotion. You'd see hesitation. Instead, what we saw was rejection. Then Mykelti puts words to it, and this is where things get wild. From Robyn's perspective, she says, it's almost like if any of them came back, it would be like letting in a parasite, like welcoming an enemy back into your space. And the second that word came out, parasite, it stopped everything. Because facial expressions can be interpreted, but language like that, that's loaded. That's not accidental. Now, if that truly reflects how Robyn sees the other women, and by extension, the kids, it's almost unbelievable. And honestly, it makes me laugh in that you can't be serious kind of way. Because let's break down what calling someone a parasite actually means. You're saying they're leeching off you, that they're exploiting you, that they contribute nothing, that they only show up to drain resources, money, time, attention. A parasite doesn't coexist. It invades. It takes over the host and consumes everything. So if Robyn truly views the other wives that way, the irony is staggering. Because if we're being honest about who fits that definition in this family dynamic, the picture flips fast. The person who entered the family and coincided with financial depletion, emotional division, and constant conflict wasn't the original wives. The person who didn't work outside the show, while others carried multiple responsibilities, wasn't the original wives. The one who benefited most while the family fractured wasn't the original wives. Yet somehow, Robyn sees everyone else as the threat. And here's the thing, This isn't coming out of nowhere. I've heard similar things from people who know the family. Comments Robyn has allegedly made about the ex-wives and even the kids, that they're bad, that they're wrong, that they're wicked. Everyone becomes the villain, while she remains the victim. That's why Tony and Mykelti's reaction matters so much. Especially Tony. This is someone who used to defend Robyn. He spoke positively about her for years. And now, he's openly saying that Robyn sees them as parasites. That's not a small shift. That's a complete reversal. When you layer that with what people have said about how Robyn behaves in private, how she and Cody carry themselves as if they're above others, it paints a much darker picture. Viewing someone as a parasite isn't just insulting. It's dehumanizing. It strips away empathy. It reduces people to something disposable. On the show, Robyn spent years selling the dream of one house, one family, one big picture. But if this is how she privately views the rest of them, then that dream was never real. Because you don't talk about unity while secretly seeing others as less than human. And here's where it gets even more serious. Because a wife returning doesn't just mean a wife returning. It means her kids come back into the family structure too. Adults or not, when mom and dad reconnect, the family reconnects. So when Robyn reacts this strongly to the idea of a wife returning, she's also reacting to the idea of the kids coming back. And if she sees them as enemies, as parasites, that tells you everything about why those kids were so easily alienated in the first place. This wasn't about family. It was about control. And we're just getting started. Because once you start pulling on this thread, everything else begins to unravel. If Robyn truly views the rest of the family, especially the kids, as parasites or enemies, then a lot of past behavior suddenly makes sense. It explains decisions that once seemed confusing. It explains the distance. And it explains why reconciliation has felt impossible for so many years. Think about what Mykelti and Tony are really saying here. They're not just criticizing Robyn's words. They're pointing out a mindset, a worldview, one where Robyn doesn't see these people as family members with emotions and histories, but as obstacles, as transactions, as threats to her security. And that's what makes this so disturbing. Because this perspective doesn't just apply to the ex-wives, it extends to the children. Children who were already part of this family long before Robyn entered it. Let's rewind for a second and ground this in reality. Robyn joined the Brown family in 2009. She was in her early 30s at the time. And the kids, they weren't adults. They weren't even close. Logan was about 15 or 16. Aspen and Leon were around that same age. Maddie was roughly 15. Mykelti herself was about 13 or 14. Hunter was in that same range. Padron was around 11. Dayton was about 9. Gabriel and Gwendolyn were roughly 9 or 10. Isabel was 6. Savannah was 5. And Truly wasn't even born yet. These were children. Some teens, yes, but still kids. So when you hear that Robyn allegedly views them as hostile, parasitic, or evil, it raises a huge question. How does a grown adult look at children navigating a massive family disruption, and assign them malicious intent? Even if there were clashes, even if emotions ran high, even if kids fought or yelled or acted out, that doesn't change what they were, kids reacting to upheaval. Robyn entered an already complex family system and fundamentally altered it. That kind of disruption has consequences. Kids lash out. Kids struggle. Kids feel displaced. And yet, instead of empathy, what they were met with, according to Mykelti and Tony, was resentment. And what's even more telling is that all these years later, that resentment hasn't faded. It's still there. Which explains why so many of the kids want nothing to do with her now. Because when someone treats you like you're nothing for long enough, eventually you stop trying to prove otherwise. That brings us to the conversation about reunions. When Mykelti and Tony were asked what a future family gathering could look like, they didn't hesitate. If Robyn were there? No. Not happening. Ever. A future with Robyn involved is a non-starter. They even break it down further. Would anything change if Robyn and her kids showed up together? Maybe, but only after years of repair. Would it work if it were just Robyn and Cody? Absolutely not. That would be awkward at best and damaging at worst. And we've seen that play out before, like at Logan's wedding, where the presence of Robyn and Cody together created visible tension. What Mykelti and Tony are really saying is that there's already a functional unit within the family, and that unit doesn't require Robyn's involvement. There's a parent-child bond between Cody, Janelle, and their kids. That relationship exists independently, and it doesn't need to be complicated by forcing interactions that everyone knows are likely to go sideways. You can have a family barbecue. You can share moments. You can rebuild slowly. But introducing someone who has caused deep emotional harm, that's not healing, that's sabotage. And when you zoom in on Janelle's kids specifically, the emotions run even deeper. Because the way Robyn treated Gabriel and Garrison left scars that haven't healed. They were accused of things they didn't do. They were portrayed as aggressors. They were labeled problems. And let's not forget the COVID rules. Those rules weren't just about safety, they became tools. Tools that created distance. Tools that kept Cody away from certain households. And when the boys pointed that out, when they called attention to what was really happening, they were punished for telling the truth. That's the part people don't like to talk about. When someone sees through manipulation and names it out loud, they often become the target. The truth teller becomes the villain. And suddenly, everything they do is framed as malicious. In Garrison's case, that narrative spiraled fast. He was called disrespectful, narcissistic, accused of having the audacity to reach out and speak directly to Robyn. But let's be real for a second. Since when is it inappropriate for a child to contact their stepmother to talk about how they feel? In what universe is that crossing a line? The answer is, only in a world where confrontation is not allowed. Where accountability feels like an attack. Where saying no is seen as disrespect. And we've seen that pattern before. Robyn became upset when people declined to participate in recording a Zoom Christmas exchange. She expressed being tired of pushback, tired of resistance. That's not exhaustion, that's frustration at losing control. Because at the core of all of this is power. Who gets to decide? Who gets to be respected? Who gets to be heard? And when Robyn wasn't treated as the unquestioned authority, the so-called head wife, everyone else became the problem. That's when lines get drawn. Loyalty is demanded. And anyone who doesn't fall in line is cast as the enemy. And for the kids, that damage runs deep. This is where the conversation shifts from uncomfortable to downright heartbreaking. Because when you look at everything through this lens, you start to realize that the real damage wasn't just between the adults. It was done to the kids, and it was done slowly over years. One of the most disturbing patterns that keeps coming up is how easily the children were recast as adversaries. Not struggling kids, not teens trying to process change, but opponents, problems, obstacles to be managed. And once that label sticks, everything changes. Think about it. If you truly believe someone is against you, you stop listening to them. You stop caring about their feelings. You start justifying behavior you'd never otherwise excuse. Distance becomes necessary. Coldness becomes logical. And cruelty starts to feel deserved. That mindset explains why Robyn could speak about reconciliation with such visible resistance. Because from her perspective, bringing the family back together doesn't look like healing. It looks like inviting danger back into her space. And that's not speculation. That's consistent with what Mykelti and Tony described. They made it clear that Robyn doesn't just feel uncomfortable around the other kids, she actively distrusts them. And that distrust shaped how Cody interacted with them too. Because here's the reality no one wants to say out loud. Cody didn't cut off his kids in a vacuum. He didn't wake up one day and decide to emotionally withdraw from half his family. Those decisions were reinforced, supported, encouraged. When one person constantly frames others as hostile, it rewires perception. Suddenly, a kid asking questions is disrespectful. A son expressing frustration is aggressive. A daughter setting boundaries is manipulative. Everything becomes filtered through suspicion. And once Cody accepted that framing, the door slammed shut. That's why so many of the kids stopped trying. Because how long do you keep reaching out to a parent who's been convinced you're the enemy? How many times do you call before you stop dialing? How many messages go unanswered before you protect your own peace? What's especially painful is that some of these kids tried anyway. They reached out. They showed up. They extended olive branches. And instead of being met with understanding, they were met with rules, ultimatums, and silence. And let's talk about empathy for a second. Because empathy is the difference between conflict and cruelty. Empathy says, this is hard for everyone. Empathy says, these are kids navigating loss. Empathy doesn't turn teenagers into villains. But empathy requires humility. It requires the ability to admit you're not the center of the story. And that's where everything seems to fall apart. Instead of asking how the kids were coping, the focus stayed locked on how Robyn felt. Her fears, her anxieties, her discomfort, her boundaries. And while adults are allowed to have boundaries, they are not allowed to weaponize them against children. That's what made this situation so toxic. There's a comment that stuck with me from a viewer that summed this up perfectly. They said Robyn behaves less like a stepmother and more like a gatekeeper. Someone who decides who's worthy of access and who isn't. Someone who controls proximity to the parent rather than facilitating connection. And if you've ever had a step-parent like that, you know how damaging it is. It doesn't just strain relationships, it fractures identity. Kids start asking themselves what they did wrong just to exist. What makes this even more tragic is that Robyn once spoke publicly about wanting to be close to the older kids, about wanting unity, about wanting love, but those words don't match the outcome. Because love doesn't isolate, love doesn't punish honesty, love doesn't view children as threats. And yet, here we are. Years later, those same kids are adults now. They've grown, they've processed, they've moved on, and they've chosen peace over chaos. Which is why so many of them refuse to participate in situations where Robyn is present. Not out of spite, not out of immaturity, but out of self-preservation. That's the part people misunderstand. Boundaries aren't about punishment, they're about safety. And when someone has shown you, repeatedly, that they don't see you as family, you stop trying to convince them otherwise. So when Robyn reacts with fear at the idea of the family coming back together, maybe it's not because she's scared of pain. Maybe it's because she knows what would be exposed. Because reunions don't just bring people together, they bring the truth with them. And the truth is something you can't control. This is where everything comes full circle, because once you strip away the excuses, the interviews, and the carefully worded statements, one truth becomes impossible to ignore. Reconciliation was never really about forgiveness. It was about control. When Mykelti and Tony talk about what a future relationship could look like, they're not being dramatic or cruel. They're being realistic. They're drawing a line between healing and harm. And the fact that Robyn can't exist on the other side of that line speaks volumes. Because if your presence alone prevents a father from reconnecting with his children, the problem isn't the children. It's the environment. They made it crystal clear that Cody having relationships with his kids is still possible. That door isn't locked forever. But the condition is simple. It can't happen under constant emotional surveillance. It can't happen while every interaction is filtered through someone who interprets discomfort as disrespect and independence as betrayal. And that's why Robyn isn't welcome at the barbecue. That moment might sound small to some people, but it's symbolic. A family barbecue is the lowest stakes form of connection. No pressure, no forced conversations, no cameras, just people existing together, laughing, eating, sharing space. If someone can't be present in that environment without creating tension, then they aren't fostering unity, they're obstructing it. What's especially telling is how quickly Robyn's discomfort is prioritized over decades-long bonds between parents and children. Over birthdays missed, over milestones ignored, over years of emotional absence. That trade-off is devastating. And yet, it keeps happening. Because when someone positions themselves as the emotional center of the family, everyone else becomes optional. Relationships become conditional. Love becomes transactional. That's why the kids don't trust the apology tour. Because apologies without accountability don't heal anything. They're just noise. And apologies that require silence from the injured party aren't apologies at all. They're demands. And the kids have had enough of those. One of the most painful realizations here is that Robyn didn't just influence Cody's decisions, she validated them. She gave him a framework where distancing himself from his kids didn't make him negligent. It made him protective. It made him loyal. It made him right. That reframing is powerful and dangerous, because once a parent believes they're justified in pulling away, it becomes incredibly difficult to reverse course. Pride steps in. Shame follows. And instead of repairing the relationship, they double down. That's exactly what we've seen play out over the years. And now, as the dust settles, The kids are choosing clarity over chaos. They're not chasing closure. They're choosing boundaries. They're not begging for inclusion. They're protecting themselves from repeated disappointment. And that's the part people need to sit with. Because if your children feel safer without you, something has gone deeply wrong. Robyn can talk about hope being dangerous. But what's actually dangerous is a system where children are made to feel disposable, where their pain is minimized, where their voices are dismissed. Hope didn't destroy this family. Avoidance did. And now the consequences are unavoidable. This isn't about punishing Robyn. It's about acknowledging impact. Because intent doesn't erase harm. And wanting unity doesn't count if your actions dismantle it. The Brown family didn't fall apart overnight. It fractured piece by piece, conversation by conversation, silence by silence. And the reason reunions feel impossible isn't because people don't care, it's because too much damage was done without repair. So when Mykelti says Robyn sees them as parasites, maybe what she's really saying is that Robyn never truly saw them as family. And once that truth settles in, everything else suddenly makes sense. Now I want to hear from you. Do you think reconciliation is still possible without Robyn involved? Or do you believe the damage is already permanent? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. And if you're new here, make sure you subscribe, hit that like button, and turn on notifications so you don't miss what comes next. Because this story, it's far from over.